Thank you. Admiral Karambir Singh, former Chief of Naval Staff and incumbent Chairman of the National Maritime Foundation. Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Director General of the National Maritime Foundation. Senior officers of the Indian Navy, both serving as well as retired. Excellencies, distinguished guests, scholars, students in particular, to whom I would like to give a big shout out for being here in such large numbers, and ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute privilege and honor for me to be here amidst all of you this morning to navigate and steer the course of the proceedings of this professional session number 4 in the course of the next 2.5 hours or thereabouts. Ab initio, I would like to express my profuse gratitude to the Ministry of Defense, Government of India, the Indian Navy, and the National Maritime Foundation, its entire team, but singularly to Admiral Karambir Singh, as well as Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, for the very, very gracious gesture extended to me to be here amidst all of you today. I'm also delighted by the in-person presence of my very, very distinguished panelists, and of course, we also have another illustrious luminary joining us online. So welcome to all of you as well. I think I'd like to use this occasion to sort of convey to you a very pleasant tiding. I'm sure several of you are already cognizant of the fact that and it's a universal recognition that the UNCLOS is the mother convention or the constitution of the ocean governance framework. Taking a cue from that, as on 25th of September this year, India has signed the Global Oceans Treaty, or the High Seas Treaty as it's alternately called, or the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdictions, the BBNJ. Call it whatever you like. And I'm very sanguine that this will also culminate in the ratification of this international instrument into our own national legislation pretty much soon. In stark contrast, I wanted to just share a piece of stats, which is 14 countries worldwide yet have signed the convention, but have not ratified it as yet. And if that's not all, 16 other nations have not only not signed, but also not ratified. So much for the commitment to ocean governance and responsible resource management. I would also like to sort of take you and sort of present to you, I think a lot of data has been shared as to the criticality of ocean governance and resource management. But I think what stands out is the estimated cumulative value of the ocean resources is estimated to be around $3 trillion per annum, and that is around 5% of the global GDP. It is also widely believed that around 2 billion plus livelihoods are supported on the back of this framework. I think it's also imperative for me to sort of take you back in time as to the level of responsibility and responsiveness, if anything, in a very negative sense, of what happened back in Somalia. You're aware Somalia is a failed state since the year 1991, and two singular developments have contributed to the abysmal state of affairs in Somalia, even as we speak, well over 3.5 decades down the line. One, of course, is the IUU, illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. And if that was not bad enough, you had dumping of toxic waste in the waters, completely depriving all potential opportunities for the youngsters of Somalia to eke out a living. So that's a lesson in history that we need to bear in mind, because as the adage goes, seldom does mankind ever learn from history. And if we don't, I think it's only to our peril. The other nuance which I wanted to share with you is directly in relation to maritime security in the domain. having dealt with it in my own erstwhile capacity as Additional Director General of Shipping for 4 years, and eventually as Director General of Shipping for 2 years subsequently. I was literally parachuted in the midst of raging piracy off the coast of Somalia. And having seen that from the civilian perspective, I shudder to think, in fact, there was a reference to the maritime militia, which is getting deployed by state actors. But visualize a scenario where you could have potentially mercenary pirates. At the end of the day, they're all mercenaries. So they're all there for the moolah. So imagine if they were requisitioned or commandeered by state actors to be their sword arm, as it were, and then you could have all mayhem break loose and make nonsense about all the ocean governance that you could potentially think. I do believe that you would do scenario building, keeping in mind this attribute as well. I deem it appropriate, given the background that I come from the civil service, having spent the last 6 years of my career in the National Maritime Administration, which is the Directorate General of Shipping, the flag administration of India, to share with you some nuggets in relation to maritime shipping. And I'll bring you the connect, and I'll drive it home pretty soon. But before that, I just wanted to share the simple fact that 95% by volume and 70% by value of all EXIM goods, export-import goods, merchandise goods, that is traded on the back of merchant ships. That's a no-brainer. I think it was also shared by Dr. Eva Pessoa yesterday. But the stark fact remains that there is an enormous sea blindedness, a complete lack of awareness in terms of the contribution of merchant shipping to your daily lives. Virtually everything that you deal with back home or in your professional sphere is all serviced by merchant ships and the vast swathes of seafarers who man these ships. So that's a challenge which we are up against, even in terms of ocean governance, and I'll come to that in a while. I'm reminded of an adage, it was an actual statement, which is now part of maritime folklore, as it were. Admiral Efthymios Mitropoulos, who served 2 terms as the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization and is currently the Secretary General Emeritus of the IMO, he once famously said, "But for shipping, half the world would starve and the other half would freeze to death." I think that very pithily drives home the criticality of merchant shipping, and which is what I wanted to share with you, because I think various other facets have already been deliberated in the course of the last 2 days, and I'm sure much more will be in the course of the sessions to follow. While on this, again, I need to sort of, pardon me for being fairly data savvy in that sense, wanted to share with you just sheer basic 2 sets of numbers. There are roughly around 0.12 million merchant ships which are plying their trade globally today. And they are constituting around 11.2 million gross tonnage. If you look at the typology of vessels which are there, the large segment of them are tankers and product carriers, which represent about 14% of the overall constituency of merchant ships. And about 5.6% are container ships. And of course, then you have the whole other range of them. $14 trillion is what is laden on the back of merchant ships annually in terms of merchandise goods. Now, if you contrast this with around a global GDP of $87 trillion, this is back in 2019. That's the last data that I could cull out. And this source is the International Chamber of Shipping. That gives you a sense that around 20% of the global GDP is driven on the engines of merchant ships worldwide. Having stated all this, I also wanted to sort of flag a couple of issues. You're aware that in the blue economy paradigm, there are 4 major blocks, and one of the pivotal ones is maritime transportation, which subsumes not just merchant ships, but also the entire port infrastructure globally. In the exposition of Dr. Pessoa yesterday, she alluded to 3 blocks, 3 pillars, and all of them, to my view, are hardware issues. One is merchandise goods, the second being ships per se, the third ports, which is a hard infrastructure. But lest we forget, there are two other dimensions to this which constitute the soft element. One of them is, of course, the all-important seafarer who, to my view, he is central and pivotal to the entire global international trade and commerce. If we really are looking to build structured ocean governance, please bear in mind the role and the essential nature of seafarers. And this has been expounded time and again as a fevered pitch to declare them as essential workers. And unfortunately, but for a few countries, not too many have deemed it appropriate to do so. We have seen it all during COVID times when virtually the globe came to a standstill. It was the seafarers who were driving ships all over and delivering merchandise to all of you back home. There are other facets which are allied to this. The enormous discomfort of, given the fact that there are long voyages going up to about 11 months on a typical contract for a seafarer. But when it is at the point of interface at the port side, the seafarer faces enormous challenges. For instance, he's up against a range of public agencies, be it customs, immigration, port administrations, maritime administrations, port state control, flag state control, port health. They are subject to enormous discomfort. For instance, just to flag a few, shore leave is a major challenge. Sign-on and sign-off of seafarers is a humongous challenge in itself. And I'm not even alluding to vast levels of corruption which plague the system. And while on that, I must also mention that when you're looking to enable an ecosystem of ocean governance, please also be mindful of the entire logistic supply chain network, which means not just ships, also the ports, but also all that happens in terms of the processes. The processes are largely cumbersome. Let's say you extract all these seabed minerals and you get them back. Clearances are a challenge in the port through customs, etc. So what we need to address is a range of business process reengineering, BPR as we call it, or substantive systems changes. A lot of it is happening on the ground. We have the National Logistic Policy, the National Logistic Portal, which is underway, which bids fair to do all of it fairly seamlessly on the electronic medium, but we still have a very long way to go. The reason why I chose to flag this is also for you to bear in mind that these are some of the elements that we need to work at. And I'll just sort of pause here before I come back later in my closing remarks. When I refer to the seafarers, there is also an imperative need to look at sort of, rejigging their entire process of learning, education, and training. Under the STCW Convention, the Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping, which sort of is the overarching pivot under which a seafarer is trained, and this is an international legal instrument of the International Maritime Organization based at London, the UN Global Shipping Regulator. Today, we have a very opportune moment in time when we will look to address this core theme. The STCW Convention is being rewritten. Hopefully, if all goes well, fingers crossed, come 2028 or come 2030, you will have an entirely new STCW Convention in play. And if you're able to pitch this in the various delegations which India leads at the IMO, hopefully we can put across even the resource geopolitics into that. I think probably that will serve the entire shipping industry and have it in good stead over a period. What I will do is, for now, I will just sort of pause here by just flagging another issue. Please bear in mind that today, in an era where international institutions, and pardon me for being very hypercritical about this, and I'm not wanting to be derogatory or pejorative about what I'm saying, but I think international institutions have become virtually effete, as it were, if I can put it. They're absolutely innocuous, and it's time that we look at the sort of a new governance architecture for them, but that's a humongous challenge. That's for a discourse on an altogether another different day. But that said, please bear in mind that when you come up with all of this, the geopolitics pertains to resources, you will also be confronted by a huge wall of tariff barriers on the one hand, which will be at play to try and deter imports and exports. Concurrently, there will be another regime of non-tariff measures, NTMs as we call it, or non-tariff barriers, NTBs. So these are various nuances which we need to be mindful of and build it into the kind of ecosystem that we look at. With that, I'll pause for the moment. I'm absolutely delighted and thrilled to be here with my fellow panelists. Before I invite them on stage in sequence and no particular order of priority at all, and just wanted to flag, may I urge you if you could just kindly bear in mind 2 ground housekeeping rules. One, needless to say, this has been reiterated by the MC as well, that please conform to the 20 minutes allotted. I'm very, very averse to applying the guillotine, but push comes to shove, I'll probably have to do that. The second, can I urge you that since this is a forum of international stature, and I think one of the underpinnings is that if we can come up with even 1 or 2 strands of tangible recommendations which are doable, if you can sort of flag it and park it, I think that'll be so much the better. Without further ado, I will now request the first speaker. Allow me a moment, please. Yep, and that is Mr. Timothy Walker, Senior Researcher and Maritime Project Leader of the Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria, South Africa, and he will be addressing us on maritime resource geopolitics and security of the Southern and Eastern Africa, opportunities for South Africa. Just sort of trying to underscore here that we are pivoting in moment from the various geographies which the various sessions were devoted to yesterday, to West Asia, the waters of the West Asian region, Southern Africa, East Africa, all the way up to a huge swathe of water, right up to Australia. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Walker. Thank you.